Of Maths Chat Live. So we are streaming here on Twitter, Facebook, on the Maths Tutors UK Facebook group, and on YouTube. So Maths Chat Live is interactive. This one makes it special. So if you have any questions while we are chatting, do please put them on whichever channel you're tuned in, and we'll try our best to address it at an appropriate time. So today I'm very excited to be streaming with a tutor colleague of mine who's also based in London, and he's in the Maths Tutors group. And one of the things I've been doing over the years is learning from other tutors who teach one-on-one, and see what their journey is, how they address specific teaching things, and in the age range or whatever level they're teaching at. So yeah, very excited to have along our next guest, Rishi Shah. Welcome to Maths Chat Live.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me today.
Well, pleasure. So yeah, it would be very useful for all of us just to know what your tutoring journey was, as in becoming a tutor, where you tutor, when you started tutoring, is tutoring the only thing you do, etc., etc. So you could just
Sure, yeah. So I guess I started tutoring at university, and we went to the same university, funnily enough, which was nice to find out. I did it as a part-time job. It was a good way for me to keep my skills in math and physics at the time going. Bit of extra income while you're a university student. And I never thought I'd ever become a teacher myself, but it grew on me a lot. I enjoyed the one-to-one interactions. I enjoyed teaching. And when I finished my degree, I thought, why stop? I should try and carry this on. Wasn't fully committed at first, so I was looking at a few different areas. But as time went on, and the more hours I put into tutoring, I decided that this is right for me. I did spend a little bit of time in a school, didn't get the same vibe from it, and then I set up my own company and went from there independently. And been teaching one-to-one for 7 to 8 years independently now. I was working for a few other companies before, and yeah, I love it. Do it full time. Nothing else in the pipeline at the moment. This year was very different for me with the effects of COVID, and that's how I got introduced to your groups, Facebook, and the whole community out there. Getting myself online has been a big change in the way I tutor and my approach to tutoring as well. Before, I was predominantly one-to-one in person.
No, that's great. That's fantastic. Yes, of course. I forgot we both went to the same university, Imperial College, that is, which is a science, technology, medicine, STEM place really. And it's great. Yeah, you're like one of the, I would say, one of the rare breed of tutors, because from what I can gather, the little I can gather, at least in London, the tutoring industry is a very fast, very high turnover. There's lots of people who just
Correct.
do it very temporarily. They dabble in it for all sorts of whatever personal reasons, a bit of cash, and so I tend to find that it's people who stick at it very long, who really love it and do it for the sake of doing it.
Definitely, and you see that with your own client base, because my client base want to stick with me for long periods of time, whereas I've spoken to some who have had a huge turnover of tutors within the same academic year. I spoke to one client who's had 5 math tutors within one term, and so they're very glad that they found me, who has so much experience in it and not doing it in between a job or in between something else just to pass the time. It's a
Yeah.
big problem in terms of volume. I definitely agree with you. There's a lot of tutors out there.
Mm. Yeah, there are. And so how would a parent discern who's the right tutor or who's not? What's like from your perspective, how have they decided that you are the right tutor, or what's any stories?
It's an excellent question, because unless unless the parent is involved or has an idea of the syllabus or the math and they're genuinely interested in it, it's very hard to decipher who's a good tutor and who's not. And although you can ask your child, the general response that you hear from children, as I've been told, is the lesson was fine. And they don't want to go into it any further. They don't want to discuss the details of it too much, unless there's a real passion there. They're excited by the lessons. They don't really want to talk about it too much. Lessons over, the work time is done. They'd rather go on and do their own things. It's quite difficult, I think, for parents to decide who's doing a good job and who's not doing a good job, who's there just to pass the time, who's making an impact. And I guess the results are the only way to manage the success of the student.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. I mean, certainly in my case as well, it's very, it's a bit of a potluck, isn't it? It's a lottery, really, at times. And teaching and learning are so incredibly complex. Like, for one, the only measure parents do have of it is performance, or what the child tells them. Like, and often the child may go off on how they how they felt about the situation. Did they feel a sense of relief? Do they feel the tutor is listening to them and they're going at the right pace? But there's very little that you can infer from that as well.
Correct. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying there's only one way to teach a subject, and some tutors have strengths that other tutors don't. I think ultimately it falls down to the relationship you have with the individual, because it's not a classroom. It's a one-to-one personal setting. I'm also not just a tutor. I'm their mentor. Sometimes they confide in me. Sometimes they tell me things that they wouldn't necessarily tell their parents or their teachers or their peers. So there's a big trust element involved there as well.
Yeah. Yeah, lots of ways. Yeah, lots of different things from this. I mean, again, like tutoring, this one-on-one time is such an incredible opportunity to actually do what I would call is mastery teaching. What is mastery teaching, actually, isn't it? It's like finding for that particular pupil what's the foundational aspect of maths that they're stuck at. So you'll do what I would do is a diagnostic and figure out where they are roughly, and then find their true starting point rather than what's being covered at the school, at the pace it's being covered at, so that
Definitely. And not only that, it's a chance for them. Tutoring doesn't necessarily have to be about someone who's struggling with math. It could be someone who's genuinely interested in the subject and wants to take it way beyond what their schools are teaching them. I think there's quite a negative stigma with tuition being because you're not good at something. But if you were to play a sport, for example, like tennis, just because you have a tennis coach doesn't mean you're bad at tennis. It means you want to get ahead and you want to master that skill, which I see in some students. And that's a perfect situation. That's a joy to teach, because I'm not bound to any syllabus. I'm not bound to any specific exam structure. They want to learn math, and I want to show them as much as I can.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I couldn't agree with it more. I mean, I've been singing live for 20 years, and I have my own singing tutor. I have a 1 hour session with that tutor, which actually I make sure I'm not myself tutoring, so I need to take time off from my own tutoring, and I'm receiving tutoring from my singing teacher. And there's no, it's very funny. I've had some people ask, well, you can already sing, so why on earth are you getting singing tutoring? So no, I can't sing. I mean, I can sing. What does that even mean? It means I can sing to a certain level, to a certain performance, but I've learned more about singing in my last 3 years of these tutoring sessions, singing coaching sessions, than I did in the last 17 years before of performing live, because you get this incredible insight from an expert, individualized to you.
And I don't think any kid would probably see it this way, but at some point, if you're just genuinely interested in something, it's a hobby. You like doing it, it's a passion. Why not discuss it with someone who has the same passion as you? You both get something out of it, I think. It's funny you mention the idea of why are you taking singing lessons? You can already sing. I hear the same comments from certain parents when they speak to each other. Parents are telling other parents, why is your kid getting a math tutor? He's very good at math. He's already at the top of his class. How do you answer that?
Yeah.
It becomes quite personal after a while.
Yeah, I mean, I like to think tutoring more from the actual actual old model of tutoring, which would be the Aristotelian and the ancient Greeks, and even in Hinduism, you have this guru and shishya, like disciple and teacher or teacher. The word guru is actually the teacher in Hinduism. So I've always seen it like that. Actually, tutoring is this kind of it's knowledge. It's teaching. I mean,
Right.
over here we have, especially in London, you have this whole kind of tutoring industry, which a whole stigma around. They're bad at the thing, so they're getting tutoring, and there's all sorts of other cultural issues. But that's just a very it's very localized time and space. I think private tutoring is a much more profound and bigger thing than what it is in the way we see it in the industry currently.
Definitely,
Yeah.
I completely agree. A guru is a guide. So
Mm.
effectively, I want to be a guide rather than someone who you rely on to do a certain thing, like pass an exam. It's much more than
Yeah, in the same way Aristotle would have been um, in the ancient Greeks. And again, I do stuff with quite a lot of different tutees in different parts of their learning journey. That's why I'm very specific with my words. I call it the learning journey. I very rarely say year 5, year 6, year 7, because irrespective of which year they're in, they're going through a learning journey, which is it is where they are in that. And I am often I'm often doing stuff that I feel is going to be good for them in the long run, but won't yield any short-term results. So I've learned over the years kind of just to have that initial conversation with the parent to set the expectations right. That actually what I'll be doing won't yield any short-term performance improvements. In fact, it may even yield into a decrease in short-term performance, because I want to be doing the things that they're doing in the school at the current rate, because I want to do things in more depth, like multi-base is a thing that I'm currently obsessed with. And so I'll be doing exploding dots and multi-base, because to truly understand place value, you need to understand multi-base. I'll be using manipulatives, so I'll do negative numbers with two-sided counters, and it
that.
will
I've seen some of your clips on that. It's
yeah.
fascinating.
So I'll spend a considerable amount of time in that before all of these things. I'll consider the field axioms, the laws of arithmetic, and sometimes I do get parents saying, actually, 6 7 months down the line now, X and Y's results are getting better. And I'm always a little bit surprised, because I set the expectations right from the beginning. It's not going to get better. You have to give me the time. We'll play the long game, and
We're
that's
in a society at the moment, though, where everything has to be a quick fix, and if it's not, it's quite easy to churn through multiple tutors if you don't see progress in a weekend. And you're right, I have to explain that to parents as well sometimes. You're not going to see a huge improvement within a month. Well, sometimes you may, but it's not always guaranteed.
yeah. It's all
And a private
context.
tutor doesn't guarantee success, just
Mm.
like anything you do doesn't guarantee it will definitely work or it will definitely create success, because both parties have to be involved.
Yeah. So how would you say um, how important is the student's part in the whole deal? Like, when do you think it doesn't work, or it falls apart from the student's point of view rather than the parents or the tutors?
Um, it definitely falls apart when the trust element is lost, because once you stop trusting someone, then you switch off. I notice myself sometimes talking to a student who doesn't have faith in their math anymore, and you can tell they're just completely despondent from it. So no matter who's talking to them, whether it's classroom or a private session, they've switched off when you start saying mathematical words or certain topics. And that's a trust in themselves, I think, that they've lost with math. And confidence is a massive issue. I think I've heard the word math phobia thrown around. I don't know if it's a real thing or not. I don't want to be a judge of that, but there is this inherent fear of math I see a lot. Um, and then it becomes a point where the kid has to decide, or the student has to decide, do I want to get better or do I want to stay as I am? Here's someone who's spending some time, they're available to help me. Should I take advantage of that, or shall I just try and waste the hour just because I have other things to do or better things to do. And I'll just do the hour because my parents told me to do the hour.
Yeah, I'll turn up because I'm expected to
Because
turn
I'm
up.
forced to, exactly.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
No matter how good or bad a tutor is or how good or bad a student is, if that's the approach, you're not going to get very much out of the sessions.
Mm. Yes, obviously we're certainly all familiar with that since we work in education. But I suppose the more satisfying things is when you're able to turn some of those around, and how
Definitely.
and how maybe you can give some specific case studies. We always like more actual case studies where you could turn things around.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I've had students in the past who have completely hated math. I found a common interest that we have. I use sci-fi quite a lot, and I use theories of physics and space and astronomy that are not really considered part of a syllabus. And you can see their attention has peaked. And once you've piqued their attention, you can explain where that has come from or why the fundamentals we use are appropriate for that level of learning. Another favorite of mine is technology. They sit with their phones, computers, laptops all the time, and they don't really think about it too much. And I explain to them that without basic mathematics a long time ago, we wouldn't have this technology. And they dispute it quite a lot, as you would as a kid. They don't believe it. But all of this stems from maths. And I reference a favorite movie of mine called The Imitation Game. I don't know if you've seen it or not.
I haven't seen it, but yeah, no.
So you know the whole story behind Bletchley Park and the Enigma machine.
Mm.
And that was mathematics that championed that breakthrough. And now we call them modern day computers.
Yeah.
It's brilliant. And it's fascinating when you go into philosophy and the history of math, you may be able to spark some more interest rather than what is the area of a triangle? Because quite frankly, I don't care what the area of a triangle is, and I don't know why a student would care what the area of a triangle is. You need to make it more relevant.
Mm. Yeah, definitely a narrative, both in the teaching sense and the historical sense, is just we are as human beings, we are kind of designed to work around a story or a narrative rather than kind of this dry, factual, abstract. Great. Okay. Well, we can dive into some actual 11 plus. I can talk
Yes.
about the 11 plus as well. So that's your area of specialism, I believe. So what
Um,
tutor.
I specialize it for half the year, and then the other half the year is focused on GCSE and A level. So it splits my year in half. It's quite interesting because different age group that you're dealing with, and different rules, I guess. The 11 plus is quite wide open because there's no set syllabuses or structures, whereas GCSE and A level, there's a very specific guide you stick to and follow. So yeah, the 11 pluses would have just finished January, February time. So just passing through that phase at the moment. And I know you have quite a lot of interest in 11 plus because I don't think you teach much of it yourself. You're more focused on the older.
Yeah, I don't teach it anymore. Yeah, I used to have the odd 11 plus students and 13 plus, but yeah, from what I can understand, at least in London, it's fairly, and the three counties area, Buckinghamshire, etc. It's mostly driven by the private school. There are public schools here.
All my 11 plus students are private sector, and it's become a highly competitive zone where I feel like you probably need a tutor to succeed. I hate saying that, but I think that's probably the reality of it because of the competitive nature, and every year seems to get harder because of what we know about the previous year. We try and go beyond that every year, and eventually there's got to be a ceiling that you hit.
Yeah, so it's almost like in the press it's suddenly called sometimes like the arms race between the tutoring industry essentially and the schools, their entry requirements, and it gets. I think some schools are even trying to introduce those untutorable exams, or they have more other things like the interviews and assessments.
Yeah, I guess at 11 plus, tutoring could be seen as kind of a hack. And so you need to upgrade your program to deter from that hack. But then it's a cycle. There's always going to be a way for someone to hack the system effectively. So you make the exam harder or different, then the new group of tutors, maybe in over a few years, find a solution to that new system. And then you have to come up with a completely different system each time. I know a lot of emphasis is now put on computerized testing, where no two children have the same test. So it learns as you input answers, it learns and it takes you off in different directions. But math, in my opinion, is the same. The math that you learn and use is going to be the same no matter what questions you get asked. You may get asked questions in a different order or different difficulty level, but the fundamentals will be the same.
Hmm. Yeah, so many things pop out of that, which we'll talk about later as well. I mean, the whole idea of, first of all, equity in terms of the parents who can afford it, and then the equity also in terms of the kind of maths they need to know already to be tutored to then be able to enter that. Because I started specializing in dyscalculia and lower attainers, so it's another, and I moved international anyway, so I kind of moved out from the London bubble, so to speak. And yeah, so then they already need to have a certain level of attainment to have a chance of getting into that school, and the parents have to find, even if they can afford it, they have to be able to find the right tutor, as you say, and that's difficult enough as it is.
Correct. I mean, I'd say the majority of cases that I'm brought in for is when the student is at a good numeracy level. They can deal with most basic math questions, and I'm there really to cement ideas and how to use those ideas in word problems, and problem solving, and also have some kind of exam technique where they can not only arrive at a correct answer, but show their trail of thought. I think that's a big issue in mathematics, where a lot of people can arrive at an answer, they can't really explain how they got there, or they can't explain properly or using the right language notation. And that I really emphasize on at a young level, because up to a certain age group, they're taught mental math, and then suddenly they're told, right, mental math is over. Now you have to write down your working and show your reasoning. It's a very hard transition for a kid.
Oh, definitely, yeah. It's a tough exam actually, and it requires mathematical maturation.
I like that word, because a lot of it is about maturity, how you've matured with your math, not just about being good at math, it's maturity.
Yeah, definitely. It's a Mark McCourt complete maths term, actually, mathematical maturation. There's a whole blog post on like 22 levels of it, from 1 to 22, from early years to A-level maths. But that mathematical maturation, yeah, it's got to be. It just takes time, right? You have to do more maths, and then often students have to be kind of hacked towards that stage, because they were doing this type of maths, and now they have to do this type of
Yeah.
maths for the exam.
Well, I think making mistakes is key. You should do problems with the intention of making a mistake and then learning from that mistake, and then venturing the options, because there's not one solution to a problem, there's many, and you should be willing to venture them if you want to get better at math. I think that's really the main focus with 11 plus, is they want an instant answer, or a mental math answer where they read a question and they know their answer straight away. But there are so many approaches that you want to instill, and I think for 11 plus success, this is really what needs to be studied, and what's important for the success of the student.
Yeah, and it's students I have had for 11 plus, they tend to be all through until GCSE, sometimes A level. So I would take them through their 11 plus journey as well, and it's actually a really good process, because they get used to this time testing, and also planning the paper, writing their working out, being quite explicit, and all these things then come in really, really useful by the time you get to your GCSEs, because they've already done that. They've been through the whole stage fright, if you want to call it that, and showing your working out, knowing that there are method marks, there's answer marks.
There's big bonuses and big pluses for testing kids at that kind of level. then it comes down to the kid whether they can handle the stress and the pressure of the situation as well. I think that's a different argument altogether. And it's not just math, right? They have English, non-verbal, verbal. They have to be comfortable with all of it.
Yeah, well, it's definitely a lot of sort of pedagogy and things to be learned from it, which is what I'd love to dive into actually. So we can
Yeah,
go into
sure.
some actual 11 plus. We can have a look at a sample paper, some questions.
Sure. So I've extracted a few questions from an 11 plus workbook. It's by Alpha Workbooks. And then we've got a question from a past paper from a school, City of London. If I just share my screen.
Yeah, I'll just tell you when it pops up. Hopefully it should.
Okay. Here we go. So that's a clock face for later. We'll come back to that. So I've highlighted a few topics that I tend to have to teach my students from scratch because they've never come across it in their own school settings. And I don't even think the 11 plus syllabus, if there is one, requires it, but you should learn these skills to enhance your problem solving abilities. So rates and proportion is one of my favorite topics. A lot of real life situations are proportional to each other. And even something as simple as going to the shops, buying one object for 59p and having an understanding that if you buy 12 of those objects, it's 12 lots of 59. Very simple aspect. Recipes are ratios. And the idea behind ratios from a young age is that if one value increases, then the other value also increases. However, that doesn't always work, especially with rates and time. If you are involving time in a certain situation, you get inverse proportions as well as direct proportions. And this is a good example of a question that tests that knowledge, tests their understanding of how you can manipulate rates. So I'll read out the question first of all. Julie takes 3 hours to paint her fence on her own. If Violet helps her, together they can paint it in 2 hours. How long would Violet take to paint the fence on her own? So for those of you who would attempt this question, my best advice is to create a ratio table. I would create 3 columns. There's the time column. There's the fence column. Well, actually, sorry, in this case, there's only 2 columns. We'd take time and fence. In another example later, we'll see 3 columns.
Right.
And first, let's deal with Julie. So it takes her 3 hours to build one fence. Put some units there for the time in case we have to change units. So time is measured in hours. It's important to understand what she will do in 1 hour. It's always very key to answering these problems. What she will do in 1 hour is she will build or paint, in this case, a third of a fence. And that's because if I divide the time by 3, I also need to divide the fence by 3. Division here becomes a fraction. 1 divided by 3 is a third. Another hard concept that kids have, how fractions and divisions are effectively the same thing. I find myself teaching that quite a lot. Right, so when they are working together, it takes them 2 hours of combined work. So what is Julie doing in 2 hours of that time? Well, she must be doing 2/3 of that fence.
Neat.
But they complete the whole fence in 2 hours together. Now that gives us an idea of what Violet's doing. In the same 2 hours here, Violet must be painting the rest of that fence. So she must be doing 1/3 of the fence in those 2 hours. Right? So we've gone from a situation where we understand what Julie does on her own. We've used that to figure out what she does in a single hour. And then we've combined that into what they do together. But her work rate, these questions are obviously assuming the work rate is always the same. Her work rate for 1 hour gives a third of a fence, therefore in 2 hours must give 2/3 of a fence. And in the same 2 hours, Violet must finish off the rest of that fence. And if I want to find out what time Violet takes to do a whole fence, I'm obviously multiplying that by 3. So she completes the full fence in 6 hours.
Nice.
And that's how I would recommend the approach for this kind of question. Yeah. Now, moving on, if you don't have any questions or comments about that, moving on, we can take the same kind of situation, but we can turn it into a purely algebraic situation where we don't actually know how many men are required or how many at work. In this case, we do know the hours, but we have unknowns. The math is no different, however.
Right.
Whether you have a number or whether you have an unknown, unitary methods where you find out what happens in one quantity is always going to be the way to best approach these questions from a logical point of view. So in this case, if Z men dig Y trenches in 5 hours, find an expression for how long it would take Y men to dig 8 trenches. So we're interested in the amount of time taken. 3 columns this time. We have men, number of men. We have the number of trenches. And we have the number of hours. Z men take Y trenches, build Y trenches in 5 hours. Now, when you have 3 variables, it's very difficult to see how all 3 will change with each other. So you have to fix one of the values and then analyze how the other 2 values work with each other. For example, if I fix the number of men, then I can compare the trenches and the hours. If I need to build more trenches, then I would need more hours, as long as the men stays the same. But then if I change the men as well at the same time, it becomes very difficult to analyze what happens to all 3 of these values. So that's going to be our approach. Let's look at what the question is asking us for. So we're trying to find 8 trenches. So I'm going to have to first figure out how can I get from Y to 8. So let's fix the number of men.
Like a constraint, isn't it?
Constraint. If I keep with the same number of men, how long would it take me to build 1 trench? I'll keep Z as fixed. Exactly the same idea. Although I don't know what that number is, it is a number. It's a symbol representing a number. So I know if I divide by the same number, I'm going to get 1. However, here's where the problem lies. Now we're dealing with expressions, which can confuse a 10-year-old who's studying for this kind of level. So we must divide by Y, and we get 5 over Y hours. Now I get asked, but what is that as an actual number? We don't know. And they have to overcome that idea where we can have an expression and this is information. We just don't know exactly what the value is. Now this becomes very easy to take to 8 trenches. We just multiply by 8. And so the time taken for these 8 trenches is going to be 8-fold as well. It's going to be 40 over Y for Z men. However, if we look at the question, the number of men has also changed. So how am I going to deal with that? Well, now that I have my 8 trenches in this question, I don't want that to change. So this is the value I'm going to start fixing. And now I'm going to compare men with the number of hours.
Neat.
However, there's a problem here if you don't think of rates. If you have more men working on the same number of trenches, it's going to reduce the time factor, not increase the time factor. So we're talking about an inverse proportion here. Unitary methods will still hold if I want to find out one man and dividing by Z. But that single man is going to take much longer to build the same number of trenches than Z men would have taken. So I'm going to have to multiply this side by Z because it's going to take me longer. I'm going to increase by a factor of Z when I decrease my men by a factor of Z. Now this is 40Z over Y, getting more and more complex. And then to take 1 to any value, for example, Y, I'm going to have to multiply it by that value itself, which is why the unitary method is so useful, because from any value, even if it's an unknown value, we can get to any other value. So here I'm going to multiply by Y. However, that's going to reduce the time. So I'm going to have to divide this by Y. And if I haven't made any mistakes, which even tutors do, the final expression will be 40Z over Y squared. And that will be my 8 trenches, which I kept fixed throughout the whole story after we got to that point. So the final answer would be 40Z over Y squared hours for Y men to build 8 trenches.
Nice. Well, that's actually pretty sophisticated, actually.
I agree. I think for a 10-year-old who's expected to learn at this level, maybe not exactly this same question, but I think the idea behind this question is training them to think abstractly about rates and ratios in general, rather than being able to just answer this question by trial and error, which I don't know how I would do it using trial and error. I find this kind of stuff very difficult to use trial and error on this type of problem. Especially when you have numbers, I still don't think trial and error is a great method. But some students fascinate me. They trial a few numbers in their mind. I don't know if it's pure luck or if they've calculated a good reason, but they get good answers using trial and error.
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose trial and error, when you don't have the tools, the mathematical tools, and of which there are several in this case, that's sort of like a brute force approach, and that's fine as well as an approach. I mean, I did mechanical engineering, and you went to Imperial as well, and there's a whole branch of numerical maths where you use essentially you're trying to come to the root using the difference method, etc.
Yeah, exactly. Convergence is exactly that, trial and error based.
Yeah.
But from a logical point of view rather than a guessing point of view, I like to be explicit with my students where they think guessing and trialing is the same thing, but they're not. The trial should come from a reasoned, logical statement, whereas a guess is a pure guess where it doesn't have to have any backing at all.
Yeah, we want them to think mathematically and use the appropriate tools. But there's a lot of maturity that needs to happen for a 10-year-old.
I agree.
You're looking at, I mean, before you even get started, you're looking at decoding the question. What on earth is that question? What is it? What is it actually?
This is problem solving, I think, at a very high level. I mean, I don't want to take anything away from GCSE students. I sometimes ask these kind of questions to my GCSE students, just to throw them off a little bit, and they struggle with the same kind of concepts, and how to use them to answer a question. They understand how to divide by algebra, they understand ratios, they understand rates, but to throw them this when they're not expecting it, and it can take them off guard, and a lot of them would struggle.
Yeah, I would say these are sort of questions that come up in the higher papers in the GCSE. So you're looking at that for an 11 plus exam. So I imagine if obviously there are children who have fluency with this at that age and they can do this, they'll be in a much more comfortable position when it does come to the GCSE, right? They've understood proportionality, they've understood the language of algebra. They probably wouldn't have done much algebra by.
No, unfortunately, in schools, especially the prep schools that I deal with. Algebra is taught very, very late on in the final year of 11 plus. And I think it's something that everyone is afraid of because of the word algebra. It's highlighted as this complicated topic. But we use algebra all the time. We use symbols in math all the time without realizing it. If you were to write this, that effectively is algebra, and I've called a word one, I've given it a symbol. We just know what that symbol means. This symbol is a plus symbol. We know what it means. So this is effectively algebra. You just know what the values and symbols are because you've been shown them from such a young age. Whereas when we write X, the unknown factor of X is what puzzles people.
Yeah, yeah, it's really great for you to put it like that, actually. And when we're using like algebra comes before arithmetic. I think this is quote I got at one of the LaSalle events, says algebra comes before arithmetic, and then because the universe is constructed, or the universe speaks the language of algebra. And one is a numeral, isn't it? It represents the unit. One is a symbol, and this other one that you have there is, again, it's just the same symbol. Plus is a symbol. The equals is a symbol that means something.
The whole equation system and the whole mathematics system is based on symbols that represent certain things. Now, whether you know what it represents or whether you don't know what it represents, that's really the question that the students are asking. But there's a fear of symbols. An articulation of how to translate symbols back into English.
Yeah, fantastic. Because I mean, I would do this with manipulatives as well, with one counter and another counter, bringing them together. And Paul Lockhart's book Arithmetic just also shows this so well. I mean, when you're talking 1 + 1 is 2, you're just saying one unit of something plus another unit of something equals 2. So you could say that one unit.
You could just easily teach the same thing by using an apple and placing an apple, a plus sign, another apple, and then placing two apples. It effectively means the same thing.
Nice. And so I guess that kind of also brings us to what you said, something about just word problems, word questions. Is that what are the kind of problem areas you find that you need to address for an 11 plus paper? I'm assuming they have to be fluent with the core.
So I've got a few other problems that aren't actually word problems. This is probably the best word problem that we would encounter today. But the differences and the difficulties are definitely definitions. A lot of definitions are required in mathematics, and you need to know what you're writing rather than remember what you've written. From an example where you're shown how to do a question and then you can just recreate that example, you haven't really understood the problem in that case. And when you're thrown into a word problem, no one's giving you a set structure to follow. Whereas if you're given an arithmetic sum, maybe column multiplication, you recognize the structure. So your brain goes into that mode where you set out your long multiplication in exactly the same way every time, because you've got a good structure there. But when I give you a word problem, the first thing you'll have to decide is, first of all, what topic is this? Which aspect of math is this relating to? What do all the words in the problem mean? That's another big issue I have. I use these phrases RTQ and ATQ with all my 11 plus students. They always take the mickey out of me for it because they know I'm going to say it at some point. RTQ is read the question. ATQ is answer the question. You can do a whole math paper without having read the question properly and without having answered the questions properly. And you think you know what you're doing, but you will lose a lot of marks along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's almost like the English skill is important, or is to actually to decode the question, and also to, because you can just read a couple of lines and it might not mean anything, but it's to what bit of that expression, that sentence, do you pay the attention that's necessary for that, for the mathematics you're trying to get out of it?
Correct.
That's a skill set that needs to be. It's, yeah, maths is concrete picture abstract language, isn't it? It's
Correct.
language
Yeah,
to
no,
abstract.
I totally agree where you can't teach one without the other. You can't teach math without having a good English skill, unless you're just teaching numeracy. I don't think that's maths. I classify that very specifically as numeracy. Math, I tend to think of it as more problem solving based. It's interesting, the idea behind language that you bring up, because I get face this problem a lot. The word off and of in a percentage question. It still causes issues. What's 5% of 50 and 5% off 50, where you're talking about a discount in that case?
Yeah.
And there, the numbers are not the problem, the symbols are not the problem. It's this word. What's the difference between off and of?
Yeah.
And I like those lessons where they actually question the words. Why is one word used as opposed to another?
Yeah, the language element. What does it mean when you put it? It's syntax, isn't it? I mean, and so computer language or this language, the order in which you put it and what each symbol
ordering
means.
is another thing. Order, you could have the same words written in a different order, or the same symbols written in a different order, and it means something else altogether.
No, that sounds like great practice. Just explicitly getting them to write it out in the meaning of it in English. I would get them to write literally 2/10 as TWOTE and THS, because tenths are different to tens in place value.
I see that all the time as well. I think it's also, I'm quite vocal with my students, which you can be on a one-to-one as opposed to a class. And I always tell them with harder problems, put your pencil and pen down for 2 minutes and let's discuss the problem. I think that's such a key skill, to be able to discuss the problem with someone else. And I let them tell me what they think the problem's about, rather than me just telling them what to do and how to approach a problem. Because I want to know what they're thinking, and I want to see how they've depicted the language and what they take away from it. And sometimes they surprise you. They pick up things that you may have not picked up. It happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something we'll talk about in a bit as well, but for me, one of the reasons I stopped teaching in person altogether in 2016 was there is a huge benefit in articulating your thoughts in general, but in mathematics as well, because you think you look at something and you think you have a thought, but when you articulate it, it will turn out to be much richer and more different to what you thought you had in your head. And that process of articulation is so valuable to our tutees and to us.
I think to tutors as well. I was just going to interrupt you there for a second, because I've interviewed tutors, potential tutors, who can do the questions, but they can't articulate what they are trying to do. So I've presented them with a problem on paper, and they jot down their workings and they get to a solution, and that's fine. And then I say, well, can you talk me through it as if I'm a student, please? Can you explain exactly why we're using X, Y, Z? And a lot of them struggle. And these are not teachers, they're not trained teachers, they're not people who are looking at tutoring for a full-time career. They, like you said in the earlier stages of today's chat, people who are just doing it to pass some time, or maybe get interested in the idea of tutoring. But not anyone can just become a tutor. It's a skill, sure.
Yeah, I mean, teachers are intellectual. I just teachers the same thing.
Yeah, same thing in my opinion.
Teachers are intellectuals, and as Mark McCord said at one of the debriefs, and we have theories, especially if you're really passionate about it, and that's what you do. And that articulation is so useful, because they can then do that with their peers, right? Because in the classroom they will be with their peers, they'll be sitting next to someone, and because you've taught them the skill of, or just the fact that if you articulate, that helps you with your thought process and just thinking about the problem, and then before you even commit it to paper,
Yes.
you kind of know. And
And I've taught a few small courses where I'm taking groups of 3 or 4, and just the idea of articulating what the question's about creates much more of a buzz than just telling them to do the question. And it creates interest when you can discuss topics with other people, and you can maybe go home and then say, I learned this today, to your parents, and explain to them exactly what you learned. You're now creating a scenario where math is not just thought of as something you do in class and then you forget about it completely outside of class. And this goes for all subjects, not just for mathematics. You want to create something that they're not just going to do for an exam purpose or a classroom setting, and then they forget about it completely after that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. This is, again, just to go back to the articulating, is yeah, it's just really great tutoring, because this is kind of batting back and forth. I think this, so you think this, or you respond, and then you go back and forth. So this is constant batting back and forth,
Correct, yeah.
and then that eventually, and as you said, it's maths is not a, it's not about getting the right answer at the quickest time. It's about making those mistakes. There's more than one way of getting the answer. There are mathematical tasks in there, which there are more than one answer. There's loads of answers.
Of course. I mean, and look, if you look at the real world, where these scientists and mathematicians are finding new theorems all the time, they don't know the answers to the problems that they're solving. And it's not about the answer that they get. It's more about what have they found out by experimentation, or what have they found out by performing certain tasks or building a mathematical model about a certain situation. There's no right answers out there. We arrive at them and then we test them, and if they work, great. But it's actually how we came to that model in the first place, which is really important.
Yeah, yeah, and you're training students to become young mathematicians and scientists, or
Critical thinkers more than anything else.
yeah, and that there are some questions for which there are no answers, or maybe there are answers and you can come up with the answer, or it will lead to more line of questioning.
Yeah. And I think the idea of when you're teaching a student, the fact that there isn't an answer doesn't mean you shouldn't venture it. Because a lot of the time, if there is no answer, a student would think it's a fruitless exercise or it's a pointless exercise. But that's not the point of math or science at all.
Yeah, no, unfortunately for them, a lot of the experiences, will I get the right number of marks in the right amount of time and get the
I
tick
hear
marks?
that all the time. I know, it drives me nuts.
Yeah, yeah. Well, great. I think you've got some other questions. We can just
Yeah, I've
dive
got a
through
couple
those.
of others.
Yeah, I'd love to just go into some questions. Love doing maths live.
Yeah, me too. I love discussing ideas with other mathematicians, not just students. It's a good way to develop your own skills. So this was from a City of London paper, 11 plus
Right.
entrance exam. And when you first look at the hexagon, regular hexagon, you would immediately think, well, how would I know what the area of a hexagon is? I've never been taught the area of a hexagon. And I don't think at any stage they were taught what the area of a hexagon is. But if you are taught that a hexagon is 6 equilateral triangles when it's regular, obviously when it's irregular, it can be anything else. When it's a regular hexagon, it's 6 equilateral triangles. This will then bring in trigonometry, geometry that you may have learned. Obviously, this is when you're slightly older, dealing with Pythagoras' theorem and sine, cos, and tan. But at this level, the idea is still the same. I want to split this into triangles of equal size rather than trying to figure out what proportion of this hexagon is shaded. And the best way to do that is to draw the diagonals in.
Right.
Now we can see the 6 equilateral triangles. Although that doesn't solve my problem, because some of these equilateral triangles have half of them shaded, but others are fully shaded. It gives me now an idea of what to do with all my triangles. I should split them down vertically. don't know how that happened. You're really testing my bit paper skills here.
No, that's fine. Yeah, I do that all the time. This is bit paper, by the way, for anyone interested in.
Yeah,
It's
it's been a great tool
shameless
for
plug.
me as a new online tutor. So now we can see that this regular hexagon has actually been split up into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 sections, all of which are equal size. They all came from an equilateral triangle, which was then further split in half to create a right angle triangle. But we know that they are all the same size. And then the question becomes very easy, because if I had given the student this problem with the lines already drawn in, they would simply say, well, there's 8 shaded sections out of 12 sections in total. And then we can simplify that problem down by dividing top and bottom by 4. So that becomes 2/3.
That's so neat.
It is very neat, because I was just going to say, at the end of this kind of problem, you take a student from, I have no idea what to do, to saying, oh, that's actually really simple. And that's the thing that they'll remember, I hope, when going forward and seeing this kind of shape again. I should split it up. I shouldn't worry about what size or what shape it is, really. Let me split it up into shapes that are more familiar to myself and shapes that I can analyze a lot better.
Yeah, and it's like they found the right starting. Well, they might be just confused by the starting point, right? It's the first thing that kind of just, what on earth do I do? But now they have one question that they can do, or they know that actually just try some things. So the starting point is construct whatever you can.
Construct your ideas. I know in previous lessons I've had with students, the phrase that comes to mind a lot is, I don't know the formula for the area of a hexagon, is the first thing they think of, because they've been trained, I guess, when they see a square, they know the formula for the area of a square. When they see a triangle, they know the formula for the area of a triangle. And the rectangle, I think at that level, it only goes up to triangles. Circles are beyond 11 plus. And then they're faced with a hexagon. So the first thing is, I haven't been told the formula for a hexagon. What do I do? And that's it. They shut down. Once they don't know the formula, they will shut down, unless they've been trained in a specific way. And so these ideas are there to tell them, well, okay, you don't know a formula, but what else do you know? What other factors can you input into this question? What else can you see in this question? And these are generally the way the discussions go with my students. I ask them a lot of questions rather than them asking me how to do the problem.
Love it. No, they're attacking the problem with whatever they know at the time.
Correct. And of course, this doesn't apply to a regular hexagon. This applies to all polygons. If you can split them up into certain sections, then you're attacking and addressing a whole heap of problems rather than one specific problem.
No, that's a great. Again, all these questions you've shown, they are easily going to be in a GCSE paper. That could be in a GCSE or higher paper.
Right. Which is one thing I champion about the 11 plus. As hard as it is, and maybe not every student is cut out for it, it will give them such good foundations if they really take on board what they're being taught.
Yeah. And of course, teachers and tutors can just use. This is a City of London paper, isn't it? And they are publicly available. These 11 plus.
Yeah, completely publicly available. I forgot to mention that. And they use them as a guide. They're called sample papers, so they're not past papers, which were actually what students did in the past. They're sample papers, and they're giving you an idea of what they expect, what kind of level of thinking they expect.
Oh, but you could easily just use that. As you've just done, you just snipped it out and
pop
it
of course.
up there.
I mean, I like you say, I do use some stuff like this for older students as well. I think they're great resources. Math is not age biased. I hate when people say I'm not at that age level, or he's older than me, or she's older than me. I don't know that stuff. It's got nothing to do with age. If I taught a 7-year-old Pythagoras' theorem, if they knew the basics behind algebra, and I taught them Pythagoras' theorem, I don't need to then wait for them to turn 13 or 14 to then say, right, you're at the right age to now learn about Pythagoras' theorem.
I couldn't agree more. I mean,
Yeah,
tutoring is this beautiful and unique opportunity where you can throw the whole age-related expectation thing
you
out
can
of the
throw out the
window.
window completely.
Um,
Which
it's
is what I love, because I like my kids to surprise me. My students, I should say, not my kids. I like them to surprise me, and venture things that their older brother or sister might be doing, and they're curious about it. Why not? You don't have to wait 2 years until you're at their age.
yeah, yeah. And this is a great problem if they've reached.
I've got one more problem if you've got time.
Yeah, yeah, sure, yeah, yeah. I'm all in.
It's a problem that I see a lot in 11 plus, which actually talks about very complicated mathematics. If you think about the hands of a clock moving, it's angular momentum. I don't think I learnt about angular momentum until I was doing my A levels, probably. But this instills the idea of how something can turn through time rather than moving a certain distance through time. It can turn or create an angle through time. And that's essentially what the clock face is. You're talking about what angles have been produced over a certain amount of time. And that's how we learn to tell the time in the first place. So a typical question at an 11 plus stage would be, what is the angle between the hands on a clock? Now, a few astute students of mine have always said, well, that depends on which angle you are asking me about, because there's an obtuse angle and then there's also a reflex angle. And that's a great starting point, because they're already thinking, well, there's two angles between these hands. So for the purpose of today's question, we'll look at the obtuse angle between the hands on a clock. Now, how would a student even start that off? Obviously, there's no measuring equipment allowed, so you can't measure it with a protractor. These are not done to scale. So you're going to have to mathematically calculate out. Well, this idea of breaking things into sections comes back. A clock face is 12 sections, and a full circle is 360 degrees. So that must tell me all 12 sections equate to 360 degrees. Therefore, one section is 30 degrees if I divide both sides by 12. Ratios and breaking things into sections coming into play now together. Now that's already helped me get some way through the question, and I can give an estimation, because the section between 4 and 5 will be 30 degrees. There'll be another section between 5 and 6, which is another 30 degrees. Between 7 and 8, 8 and 9. Sorry, my lines are not very accurate. And then we'll put the final one in there. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sections, which would be 150 degrees, and 6 sections, which are 180 degrees. I've already narrowed down my answer to understand that it's between 150 degrees and 180 degrees.
80.
And I think if you can get that far, that's better than not answering the question at all. And I encourage all my students, even if they can't get a final answer, write down something you know, write down something you can tell them, because examiners reward knowledge. They don't just reward answers. If you can show knowledge on a page, you can get rewarded for it. Now, the problem with a clock is that the hands don't stay on the numbers exactly. They move between the numbers. And this is where the idea of angular momentum comes into play. The hour hand will move from the 9 to the 10 in 1 hour. And that's 30 degrees. The minute hand tells me what fraction of the hour I'm moving through. So if I'm at the 4, then 4 out of 12 is a third of the way through the hour. So what the minute hand is telling me is that the hour hand is a third of the way through 9 and 10. Obviously, we could probably tell the time as 9:20. That's a third of the way between 9 o'clock and 10 o'clock. Well, the angle works in exactly the same way. I'm looking now for a third of a section. And if we go back to one section being 30 degrees, a third of a section must be 10 degrees. Let's just get rid of this. Well, now I know for sure that this is 10 more degrees than the 5 sections on the clock. And that's definitely less than the 180 degrees, which is the 10 sections on the clock. And so my final answer for that obtuse angle must be 150 plus 10, which is 160 degrees.
Nice.
Obviously, the question would get more complicated if this minute hand was not exactly on one of these values. You could have 919, for example. That would create a bigger problem. But we still know that a hand moves around the clock. Every minute for the minute hand is effectively 6 degrees, because there are 60 minutes around the clock, which is 360 degrees. So every minute is 6 degrees as you go around the clock. You can build more detail into the question, but the ideas are going to be the same.
Yeah. Yeah, the key realization is the sections, the degrees in the sections and slicing it up.
Correct.
Which,
yeah, I mean, if you slice this up even further, you create 60 sections, then it becomes hard to visualize. So I think the 12 sections is a good place to start, and then break it down further from there.
No, these are great questions, because they have so many things in them, right? They have the fraction bit, and they have the angles, and
I agree. That's why I champion this over numeracy. I mean, a kid can know his times tables up to whatever level, but it doesn't really prove anything in a mathematic sense.
Yeah, I know.
Being able to add, subtract, divide, and multiply very quickly and accurately is a great skill, but unfortunately, it doesn't depict how good a mathematician you are.
Yeah. I mean,
for example, my mental math is terrible. I always tell my students, your mental math is probably better than my mental math, but I don't need mental math to be able to solve these kinds of problems.
Yeah, I remember once. I mean, a very similar thing. I just tell my tutors I'm too old for having such good mental maths as you. But I remember telling one tutor, maths isn't just mental maths. Or I even said something, maths isn't mental maths. And he was like shocked. He wasn't shocked to hear that statement, actually.
They think math is numbers, and numbers should be numbers, and everything else is not numbers, and that's not math. And it's a bit sad to see. I think they grow out of it at a certain age, but it's a bit sad to see that at a young level, that's how these subjects are taught.
Can you calculate that as quickly as possible? Yeah. Okay, brilliant. Well, that's 4 nice problems. I had maybe just a couple more things. We've been doing for over an hour, so we'll try and wrap up here. What did we write down? I'm just gonna readjust our window a little bit, fit everything in, both me and you in. Just doing that on the fly. Yeah, great. I mean, for me, my favorite thing, which I'm passionate about, is online tutoring, right? So you were tutoring completely in person until about this time last year.
Not completely in person. I just like yourself, I do have some international students that I've been teaching for a while, and the level of online teaching there is nowhere near the level of online teaching that I've learned in the past year, having to do it all the time now, full time during the pandemic. And it's because of people like you and groups on Facebook and YouTube videos that these ideas are shared and explored, because when you can see someone else tutor online, you can pick up tips and ideas. Whereas one-to-one visitations, no one else is in the room. No one can, unless you record it, you can't really go back and watch it yourself or get any critique on it. It's just the two people in the room. And I've learned an incredible amount in the last year about how to teach online. And it's a very different skill, teaching in person and teaching online. Although I don't deviate from my plan a lot. What I would do in person is still go through the same processes, but on a page in front of us. Here I'm doing it on the screen with a bit paper. So that element is still there. But definitely in terms of articulation, organization as well, you have to be a lot more organized online. These skills are very important.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose in the early days of last year was that the tutors were highly adaptable and also like learning themselves, just threw themselves into it. I mean, that you had no choice, right? And quickly learned the ropes. And it is, I've been, what I've struggled to do is kind of articulate what that journey is like from the beginning. For me, it was such a long time ago, and I never really had a diary or anything, so I've kind of gone to that point where it's difficult for me to see what it is. So maybe you can give some tips to those people who are still learning how to teach online,
Sure.
or have been
I'll
doing it
give you,
for
I
a
was going
year.
to give you an example of pre-online and post-online. So pre-online with my international students, I was doing a webcam where the camera was pointed to my page on my desk, and I was writing on the page as if I was in a one-to-one session. And you know, it was okay because I only teach internationally maybe 3 or 4 hours a week, so it didn't mess up my schedule too much in terms of planning in advance and having to change my whole system of teaching. But then when COVID hit, like you said, and every class had to be done online, and I had to be very quick and rapid between sessions, you know, I was a little bit clueless. I joined some groups, which are completely invaluable. To get someone like yourself who's been teaching for 7 years online to explain to someone very simple things like buy a graphics tablet,
Yeah.
completely invaluable. But I would have never used one before online tutoring. Some resources like BitPaper as well, an online whiteboard that are designed specifically for online tutoring, I think. I'm not sure the origins of BitPaper, but it seems like they're designed specifically for teaching. And they've got all these extra resources and functions embedded within them. Things like Desmos, I'm sure you've heard of, it's a very, very good tool because no matter how well you can draw graphs on paper, you can't zoom in, pinpoint accuracy of the computer, show solutions, solve equations just by using graphs. I think these are all completely different skills as you would do in a classroom setting or on a whiteboard or on a sheet of paper.
Mm. Yeah, BitPaper is it's designed by tutors for tutors actually. The BitPaper CEO Leo Evans, he's a tutor, so he designed it. He saw the things in the market that were kind of like whiteboards, and he was seeing that just kind of sticking bits of paper up or pointing the
Yeah.
webcam at the paper was a very suboptimal experience. So, and then over the last more than 5 years, it's been fine tuned. I mean, I joined the BitPaper journey 3 years ago, yeah, 2017, and it's been consistently tweaked, tested, fine tuned, tweaked, tested, fine tuned. All the like, it's responsive to what tutors need to do.
Definitely.
And I pushed it to using manipulatives. I'm just doing make my own things because two-way interactivity.
Yeah. So I was just going to mention the two-way interactivity. I think there are pros and cons with this, and this is one of the major problems I face. Um, it's getting them to write on the board with you. It can slow down the lesson incredibly, and it's also for a certain age group, it's a distraction. They start seeing colors, shapes. They get completely distracted from the lesson. And the graphics tablet as well. It's not easy to just pick up and start writing as I write on there. It took me about 2 weeks to get used to it. At the beginning, my hand was all over the place, and it was very difficult to get used to that. So when you introduce a new student to this and you want them to collaborate with you on the board, I found 9 times out of 10, unless they're used to doing it for other reasons, or they've done some art or some computing in the past, they find it very difficult. So they're watching me as they would watch a lesson in class, and then they're taking their own notes as I'm writing things on the note. But I would love for them to evolve, maybe have some form of online learning at school where they're taught to use tools like this so they can interact. Because I think the lessons would even elevate to an even higher level if both parties are able to interact at the same level on the whiteboard.
That's a really, really good point, actually. Yes, so there's actually, when you're teaching, I suppose when you're more expert online tutor, you are teaching both the mathematics and the technology and how to interact with the technology. And the more you teach online and the more different type of students you teach online, the more you realize how they communicate. You're very slowly conditioning in the first stages for them just to articulate or just to be able to get onto the call. I think that is a challenge enough because you're training your student first and foremost. You're training the parent as well on how to get the right. It has to be in a nice, well lit space. It's got to be quiet. The computer has to have good Wi-Fi. All those technical elements, lighting, and that skill of getting students to articulate is a skill. Actually, they have to learn that skill, and that's probably the first and most important thing. And then interacting through devices, you have to figure out what device they have. So I mean, I'm training up 7, 8, 9 year olds to interact back because I want them to interact back on bit paper. For often they have their own touch screen or tablet. The touch screen is the first way to go, so they have their iPad.
Yeah, I agree.
But it is actually a skill set, and what you don't want to do is distract them with all that kind of stuff right at the beginning. The first few sessions is really about this articulation and that pinging back and forth that you've just mentioned, and then very slowly you start phasing in this. Can you just label that side? Can you just draw a line? Can you just put your name or something like that?
No, I completely agree.
uh,
And all the bad press there is for COVID and education, I think this is one thing that has changed how students view their own education dramatically. Is that I've seen the transition between what they were at the beginning of a lockdown compared to how technologically versed they are now. And some of my students have organized Google Drives with all their notes, their folder, all their notes are in one place, all their questions are in another place. They scan and send their work to me before sessions. They crop pictures, questions that they want to ask me, put it on the bit paper. And that was completely new to them before they started the whole online schooling. It's not just because of tutoring, it's online schooling as well that's helped this.
You'll often be surprised by I've had lots of students who already had a graphics tablet for their artwork. I've got a year 10 at the moment who does animation, so he's got like an incredible setup already. Or some of them are gamers, so they've already got like hand-eye coordination.
I know the ones who are quite on the ball with gaming and art and graphics. They were the ones who picked it up very quickly. For sure.
I mean, they were snip pasting without me even telling them. Like one of my students, like, here's a question, snip paste.
Who I go to for technological advice. He's so brilliant. I mean, he designs websites in his spare time, and he's coding I think he's 10 or 11. He's coding games, and he just absolutely loves it. And he's told me he prefers online schooling because he can actually get more out of it than when he goes into a class and he has to sit there and he's bored half the time because he knows what's going on and he's finished the work and he's just waiting for other people to catch up. So there are definitely merits to this whole idea of teaching from an online platform. I think both are needed, to be honest, but it shouldn't be one versus the other at all.
Yeah, I mean, on Twitter I saw these threads about children being digital natives and teachers teaching them online, and some of them just being disappointed that they were not digital natives because they weren't picking up stuff. But I mean, children are just children. They will learn stuff the way you teach them. So if you are being taught about how to use a graphics tablet or how to interact in technology, they'll pick it up very quickly. But of course, you need to be taught just like anyone else needs to be taught. The digital native term is a bit misleading, but they can learn very, very fast because they are already in some ways have some of the prerequisites. They're interacting on technology, but they still need to be taught explicitly.
Correct. And they're also probably curious about it because I'm sure when we grew up, we didn't have any of these things. So we didn't see them until we were adults. And by that time, you make a decision. Do you want to learn it or do you not want to learn it? But as a kid, if you're born into the world right now, you're viewing people on their phones and tablets and computers all the time. So naturally, as a 2 or 3 year old, you're going to be curious about the lights and the screens and the sounds. So it's instilled from a young age, probably without them knowing.
Mm.
And it's the way the world is heading. So you have to teach these skills.
Yeah, yeah, no, no, definitely. You don't have to convince me about online
Yeah,
tutoring.
no,
So, yeah,
for all the audience that's listening out there.
yeah, yeah. Or personally, no, not convince me, but yes, there's
Yeah,
still convincing to be done. But probably more important than convincing, it's a training thing that we as teachers need to train to teach online. Parents are finally, for the most of it, know what Zoom is, what teleconferencing, video conferencing is, and students have to be trained. So it's a very complicated system
I
where
agree.
all three parties are involved.
I, and I think you're right. It's not about convincing. It's about being open to multiple platforms. You shouldn't close it off. That's my advice. And I know there are I don't want to drop anyone into it, but some of my students have told me that the older generation of teachers are very adverse to this online teaching, and they haven't done it very well. And it takes someone of a certain skill set to teach online. And when I show them math, I do something very simple. For example, I open a bit paper and solve an equation in front of them. And they'll say to me, I wish my teacher did that when I had online schooling. I'm like, why are they not doing that? I'm really puzzled why they haven't taken that extra step to learn the technology to be able to teach.
Yeah. 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 No, that's. Yeah, it just requires. It's actually quite a tricky journey, isn't it? When yeah, it takes quite a lot of time to get into it, and needs to be done in the right time, and visualizers are becoming commonplace, graphics tablets are becoming commonplace, and now there's a community of it. So it's yeah, it's all heading in the right direction.
It's heading in good direction.
Yeah, yeah.
Definitely.
Okay, well, I guess I'll go with few final thoughts. Just on that, like tutoring industry, the whole tutoring thing. When we were talking earlier, we made some notes. The 11 plus thing is a mix of finding is a teamwork, isn't it? It's really the parent and the student and the tutor.
Right. Yeah. There's three viewpoints. It's the student's viewpoint, the parent's viewpoint, and the school's viewpoint, or the teacher's viewpoint. And they all need to be in harmony for this to work very well. Because you can have a parent wanting a kid to go to a certain school where the ability may not be there from a teacher's point of view, and the student detests the school. So you've got three conflicting arguments, all in the same pot. And who wins? Well, unfortunately, it's generally the parent. Parents say, I want you to apply to that school. I'm putting in the application for that school. You've got no choice. But yeah, definitely all three need to be in perfect harmony with each other.
Yeah, I mean, if you get parents who are anxious about it and they are pushy, then it can be quite difficult for the whole thing.
It can be, and I get where they're coming from. I don't put blame on anyone. Not everyone has an open mind, and you only can go on your past experiences. For example, if you went to a top school and you worked very hard from a young age, and then you graduated from a good university, and you got into a good job, and you're doing very well in life, of course you'd want your kid to go through the same motions. And because you don't know any other way, you think that, yeah, I should encourage my child to go through the same schooling process, go through the same university process. And I think it's quite encouraging if you see your parents as successful. You want to be like them, or you want to admire them, and so you should ask also for their advice. It's not just a student-teacher relationship going on here.
Yeah. Limes Right did a whole Maths Chat Live and a maths conference presentation on social learning theory and parental expectations and the environment. Well worth watching. Oh yeah, we got Karina Berg, was tuned in from the US. She's a teacher in the US. Yeah, she's hasn't. Yeah, again, she mentions she hasn't had a weekend for herself since last year, so always catching up with what else she could learn, which is, yeah, exactly, it's been very, very difficult for teachers to improve the online learning online learning experience for my students. It's not been easy. Yeah, that certainly is. So
I found you've told me many times I need to stop tutoring 7 days a week, and I will do that. But I've also learned that a lot of my spare time now goes into enhancing my online teaching and also enhancing my own skills, like building a website, making a video, making a podcast, for example. These things are all skills that need to be taught or learned. It doesn't just happen naturally. So my whole life right now seems to be revolving around the online culture, which is great. I've like I said, I've learned a tremendous amount.
Mm. Sounds brilliant. It's been a great live stream.
Yeah,
I
thanks.
would, while we were live streaming, I think I just thought of we could have a panel actually, because I know a couple of other tutors who do in very similar situations who've had to learn very quickly and also do exam preparation and a whole range of things. So it'd be quite a good, nice, rich discussion. It only occurred to me when we went live, but
Yeah, no,
yeah.
I'm
So we
more than
could,
happy to get involved, spread the
yeah,
word of.
yeah. Well, great. Thanks again for your time and bringing a knowledge of those questions. And the live stream's there anyway, so if anyone's tuning in later on, you can still ask us questions.
Yeah, please do ask. I'm always happy to answer questions as well. We all learn from each other. Is my ending quote.
Yes, yeah, no, that's fantastic. I think the openness, there's the tutoring industry needs this kind of openness where tutors are learning from each other. I haven't seen much of it at all, actually. It was my because I didn't see it, I started the tutor meetups in London, started turning up to CPD events, but I think as an industry, there's a long way to go, but you're
There is,
certainly one
but
of the few.
it's very good that we have people like you to drive this forward, and through you, maybe 10 others evolve and start driving it forward as well. So I only see it going forward in the right direction.
Yeah. Karina's just tuned in a little bit late. Yes, Karina, we were talking about a bunch of online teaching tools, and also we looked at some very specific questions. So we actually did some maths, or Rishi did some maths while I was kind of absorbing it. So you can catch up on the recording. Fantastic. So I'm gonna stop streaming there,
No, thank you
and
very
we'll just
much.
have a quick chat after that. We'll both wave goodbye. So to finish